Symmetry 2017 and Synchronicity 2010. She has been featured at several poetry readings and presented multiple poetry workshops. So Dr. Banerjee, thank you so much. And if you can jump in and start us off tonight, we'd be really grateful.
Hi, everybody. I hope you are doing okay. Everybody is healthy. And thank you, Karen, for a nice introduction. Just a little bit about myself. After I emigrated long time ago. After emigrating, I joined, emigrating to US, I joined Johns Hopkins University, a wonderful place for me. It was, and then I received a PhD degree in computational geophysics, and I have taken into myself, I have immersed myself into the science of Earth. So it was a privilege. So while working, I started writing poetry from 2002. So I will read some of my motherhood poems, and the first poem will be A Witching Hour. The ancient tapestry of inky sky hung before the window. Stillness thickened as the tireless sea thrashed down below on the steep black rock. It sang the same hymn to memory, eulogizing beaches I walked barefoot. Once on a raw Sienna beach, I roamed with my children, chasing turns, while flapping our beach towels. Nearby, ice cream cake cottages dozed. Squeezing my toes against the sand on Ipanema Beach, I watched women with fat bottoms and lean men. On hilltop, Christ the Redeemer raised his arms to fly. The memory of the powdery white sand of Gulf Island dazzled in darkness. Ancient Fort Pickens loomed large. Setting sorrows aside, I wept in delight. This poem was conceived at another beautiful ocean front, that was Salvador, Brazil, Bahia County. I hope you enjoyed that one. Then my next poem is titled Solitary Creatures. Who knows when her day began, but her bare footsteps shift the silence of the dawn, like the maple tree shaken by the early winter wind in the backyard. Before work, up and down and around the kitchen, she glides, preparing for lunch, dinner, and laundry. My door creaks open. She tiptoes to the desk, skipping over stuff on the floor, looking for something. Outside, a lone goose honks. She squints at the field trip permission slip, signs, hovers over me for a moment, then goes out. Motionless, I remain before falling asleep again. The next one is titled The Bay Leaf. It is dedicated to my mother. And this is a little longer poem. Hang in there. A loud knock on the flimsy wooden door jolted three of us. Mother rushed to open. While trying to hide the rip in her sari, a giant of a young Mussulman was standing there, taller than the door. Two taxicabs blocked the alley. A strange sight indeed. 7 men and women, young and old, tumbled out. Neighbors watched the spectacle. My shy little brother ran off and stood still, facing the darkest corner of our only bedroom. That was often his solution. But I remained curious. Muscle-man hauled in many valises and suitcases. Others followed. The cab driver needs his fare. Somebody instructed mother. She dived into the dark bedroom. I slipped inside before she could close the door. Shaking out rupees from the hidden rusting tin, she hissed at me. Get an education and earn money. Then you won't have to bear with this nonsense. That's it. No more money to buy any food for the rest of the month. We are out of the rationed quota of rice for 2 weeks. In the darkness, her eyes dazzled and lips twitched. Brother whimpered. An actress she could have been. She was all smiles out in the courtyard, welcoming relatives from nowhere, then returning to her tiny kitchen to add water to dishes that she cooked in the afternoon. That evening at dinner in the courtyard, father complained about the thin dal and smaller portion of curry. But my portions were even smaller and no fish. She kept on putting rice on the plate of the Mussulman. You should make the dal thicker, the fat lady offered advice, taking 3 helpings. The granduncle ate in silence. I took away empty dishes. Conversations continued. Bells rang in the temple of Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth, filling the sky lit by moonlight. Alone, mother sat in the dim kitchen, staring at her sparkling but empty brass plate. What are you going to eat? I whispered. Come back later to help me to clean the kitchen. She replied, disobeying. I stood by the door, staring over her shoulder. A tablespoon of rice from the cooking pot and a teaspoon of curry sauce. That's all she could put on the plate. With great care, she spread the minuscule mixture around, painting a plateful of food. Then ate every grain one by one, slowly. Lastly, sucking the brown bay leaf. That's all. What's the time? Do you have enough time for another short one? Or
I'm looking at the clock and I am thinking, because there are 4 more readers and we may need time at the end, that we maybe should proceed. But what incredible work, Dr. Banerjee. It's absolutely beautiful.
Don't call me Dr. Banerjee.
Oh, okay.
I'm retired.
Okay. What
that's fine, absolutely fine with me.
I would love to hear at the end. The details are so, I really got the sense of this vast natural world and so many of them in the terms of the details. And I have heard it said that physics is a kind of poetry, and I would really love to hear if your science informs your poetry at all when we get back together at the end for a conversation. So
That would be absolutely fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next reader is Rebecca Mark, a native of Nebraska. Rebecca Mark is a former teacher who writes short literary fiction, and she is the author of 2 novels, A Calm Round of Hours, which came out in 2019, so quite recently. Oh, and even more recently, and In Sweet Arrest, In a Sweet Unrest in 2020. Since 1980, she has lived in Wheaton with her husband of 43 years, and she is the mother of 3 adult children. Rebecca, thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to hearing your work and more about your process.
I'd like to begin tonight by telling you a little bit about the long road that I took to self-publishing my first novel in 2019. I actually began writing it in the spring of 1977 after I'd finished a master's degree. Then I put it away for several years while I got married, settled in Chicago, worked as a secretary, then went back to school to get accredited to teach in Illinois. And after teaching high school English for 3 years, I had my first child in 1983. I thought maybe I'd be able to do some writing while taking care of a baby, but I really didn't get much done. I had 2 more children in 1985 and 1988, so I didn't do much writing, although my writing fiction was always a goal that I had. I put raising my children first and being involved in their lives. As soon as my youngest was in school full-time, I thought I'd be able to write more, but then my widowed elderly mother moved to Illinois from Nebraska, and I spent a few years helping to care for her as her health declined. After she died in March 1998, I decided to finish my novel, and I did that in late 1998 and 1999. However, I really had no idea how to publish a novel. So around 2000, I bought various publishing guides and started contacting agents in New York. However, few responded and no one was interested. So I gave up and decided to concentrate on writing more short fiction. Then I decided to substitute teach to earn money to self-publish my novel. And so I did that for 4 years. Then I decided I needed to feel as if I had the credentials to self-publish. So I set about trying to get some short fiction published. And after about 4 years of trying, one of my short stories was accepted in a literary journal. Finally, in the fall of 2018, I began the process of self-publishing the novel that I'd begun 41 years ago. Talk about a long process. My novel was ready very late in 2018, and in the meantime, I decided to challenge myself by writing another novel using as the first-person narrator the baby of my first novel. I wrote that novel between about 2013 and 2015, and I self-published that novel in 2020. And I also continued to write short fiction. My 2 self-published novels are alike in that both are love stories. The first, though, is much longer, has a female narrator, and takes place roughly between 1977 and 1981. Its narrator, Sarah, is a young woman who would like to find love, but she wonders if she's doing a good job at the profession she's chosen. And as an artist, she's also very conflicted about what art is. My second novel is much shorter and takes place between roughly 2014 and 2016. Its narrator is a young doctor, Peter, who is also trying to find love, but he has not been successful because he thinks he wants a woman with certain characteristics, which causes him to judge women harshly. Plus, he also has a troubled relationship with his own father, who is also a doctor. Both novels take their titles from the lines in the poetry of John Keats, the English poet who was concerned with the nature of art and the meaning of life. Keats did not have the luxury of living a long life and experiencing things such as marriage and fatherhood. Rather, he was sick quite a bit, watched his brother die of the disease he knew would kill him as well, and did in fact die in 1821 when he was 25 years old. I feel that one of Keats's great messages in his poetry is that one experiences the richness of life by recognizing its opposite, namely death. So the young idealistic poet may declare that a thing of beauty is a joy forever, but forever is really a hope, an illusion, a sleep full of sweet dreams and health and quiet breathing. Hence, life is a calm round of hours. But it is also excitement and joy and sorrow and so much more. I decided I wanted to complete my exploration of this theme by tackling a trilogy, in that I wanted to tell the story of another one of the characters from my first two novels. Hence, since the stay-at-home order began in March, I've been writing my third novel, and I've currently completed a little over 500 manuscript pages. I think there's going to be a lot of fiction that comes out of our pandemic because sitting alone in front of a keyboard for several hours is what many people have found themselves doing. I hope to complete my novel in 2020 and publish it in 2021. I'd now like to read briefly from my first novel, A Calm Round of Hours. The narrator, 22-year-old Sarah Keatson, is at her parents' home in a small town in Iowa. It's Christmas Eve, 1977, and Sarah and her parents have just learned that her sister Melanie and husband Dan, who are also present, are going to have a baby in the summer. I'm beginning on page 71. And of course, we talked about names. Melly liked Amanda for a girl and Nathan for a boy, while Dan listed Cody and Carson as his favorites. Then we all had to know where he'd gotten Carson. Nowhere in particular, he said. I just like it. It has distinction. I asked Dan if he was named after anybody in particular, and if he knew about Melly's name. He thought perhaps he was named for a great-grandfather named Daniel, and he knew Melanie was named for our paternal grandmother. Then I told Dan that I was named for my two great aunts on mother's side, Sarah and Daphne. Melly's middle name, Ferris, was mother's maiden name. We thought that tradition was nice, especially when a woman took her husband's name and there was a chance the family name would die out because of no male heirs. We had one male cousin on father's side of the family, Thomas Keatson, who was still in college. Provided Tom married someday and had a son, the Keatson surname would not cease. Melly thought she'd like to use Keatson as a middle name for either a girl or a boy, and Dan seemed agreeable to this. Then we all said the suggested names out loud to test them for ease of pronunciation and melodic quality, discovering that both male choices had identical rhythms. Then we noted that Jody produced the same effect. Only Amanda was different because of the extra syllable. Melly, who was a junior high English language arts teacher, pointed out that my name consisted of 3 trochees, like those of the suggested names. Da, 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 Sarah, Daphne, Keatson, she said to illustrate. But Amanda is iambic, while Keatson and Weaver are trochaic. At this point, Father declared that he believed all these da-das didn't matter much, and then it was time to go to bed, and 7 months from now, he'd be happy and we'd all be happy with whatever name was chosen. It was a long speech for our father, but we took his advice and went to bed. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Rebecca. Just in time, here's my timer. I'm sure we all really appreciate you sharing about the journey and the kind of tenacity and faith you had to have to keep going and return to it after these kind of long periods where you were so focused on other things. So again, that might be something we talk more about during our question time. It's really, really interesting and inspiring. So thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Our next reader is Adam Kovac. Army combat veteran and former newspaper reporter, Adam Kovac is a full-time writer and soccer dad who lives in Wheaton. His debut novel, The Surge, was published in 2019 from Engine Books, an Indianapolis-based literary press. So Adam, thank you. We're looking forward to hearing from you now.
I'm glad you're all here, and I'd like to thank the Wheaton Public Library for hosting this event. Yes, I'm Adam Kovac, and I'm a full-time writer living in Wheaton. I'm the author of The Surge. It was published 2019 in January of 2019 by Engine Books. It's a great small literary press in Indianapolis. And the novel, The Surge, follows a group of Army soldiers serving in Iraq. Now, while the story takes place during wartime, it's not a war novel. If anything, The Surge is a book about alienation and loneliness and greed. And I tried to write a book that'd be a good fit for anyone who enjoys reading fiction. If it's okay, and to save time, I'm not going to read from The Surge. Instead, I'd like to share a bit more about my background and the path I took to becoming a published author. I didn't start writing books until I was in my early 40s. When I was a kid and asked what I wanted to be when I grew up, I said I wanted to be a writer. And you know what my parents told me? That's not a real job. My mistake back then was that I listened to them. So I joined the Army when I was a teenager. I served more than 8 years on active duty. I saw a little bit of the world. And I left in part because I thought the GI Bill was a nice benefit and I didn't want to waste it. So I enrolled at Purdue University. I studied journalism. I wanted to be a writer, remember. I even went to grad school for journalism at the University of Illinois, Springfield. I ended up covering the crime and courts beats, mostly for newspapers in Indiana, Florida, and here in Illinois. But in 2006, with the war still going on, I decided to re-enlist in the military. I felt it was important to do my part. I ended up serving in Iraq and then in Afghanistan in 2009, where I was wounded in combat. And that's got me thinking about being a writer again and writing books. Well, I still had some GI Bill money. So I enrolled in Northwestern University. I earned my MFA in creative writing there. And that's where I started writing The Surge. And 3 years later, after I typed the end, the hard work really began. For me, the path to publication was a bumpy road. I took roughly another 3 years and more than 200 rejections before I ended up finding an agent. And there were dozens more rejections after that before Engine Books made an offer. I have 2 other novels, an adult novel and a children's book, which I still haven't found a publisher for. And I recently started work on a 3rd adult piece of fiction. So why do I keep going? Because some of my writer friends, you know, they hear about what's been going on the path that I've been taking, and they have to ask, why do you keep doing it? But I guess I've reached the point in my life where I'm more afraid of trying and failing than not trying at all, if that makes any sense. And that gets me to what I hope those of you who are thinking about writing your own books might take away from this chat and other author events at the library. You know, believe in yourself and believe in your stories. They deserve to be told, and the only one who can tell them is you. So I say read a lot and write a lot and don't quit, and you'll get there. For more about The Surge, you can go to my website at adamkovacwriter.com. You can also check out a copy of The Surge from the local author section of the Wheaton Public Library. Again, thank you for spending some time with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Adam. We have a few minutes, and if anybody would like to type a question into the chat, we can. I know for myself, again, kind of as with Rebecca, I really am grateful for you speaking to the fact that it is such a hard, long journey. And I'm just curious if you have tips for people who might be experiencing rejection right now as they send out their work. Did you find yourself toughening up to it? How did you? Oh.
No, I can't say it gets easier at all. And if you follow a lot of authors on Twitter, even the highly successful ones, and by that people who win awards and people who make a lot of money, or at least enough to live on, they'll tell you that rejection will never end at any point in your career. I think I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say Stephen King is probably the only person who does not get rejections. It's going to keep coming. So like I said, you've got to really believe in what you're doing, and you're only going to really fail if you quit. I mean, there are lots of publishers out there. There are lots of agents out there. And personally, my attitude was, I'm going to submit my book to every single one of them that publishes adult fiction. And eventually I will find one that's a fit. That's how I felt with an agent, and then, I kind of said the same thing to the agent when we were talking about submissions. Let's just keep at this and eventually we'll find a home. Now the agent has their own reasons for stopping the submission process. I mean, they've got to eat. They've got to, is this project going to be financially worth their time? Especially, the guys living in New York. I mean, rent is expensive there. So an agent might say, I'm going to submit this book 20 times. And if we don't find a home for it, that's it. It's done. And we're going to go our separate ways, or send me another project. And you have to make the choice, do you part ways with an agent after taking all this time to find them? Do you give up on this book, this novel that you've put, whatever you've put into it, all that you've put into it? So it's a personal decision. Some writers, they'll try to publish books and they won't find a home for it. They won't get an offer. So instead of just keep banging away at the same book, they'll put it aside, write a new one. There's lots of different, I guess, ways to deal with it. But is the rejection ever end? Does it ever get easier? For me, no. You just keep writing because you can't stop, I guess.
Yeah. Sounds like you still have the spirit of a warrior when I hear you say that. Thank you so much, Adam.
Thank you for having me. This was great. It's great hearing from all you guys.
Oh, yeah. Okay, our next reader is Eric Wentz. Eric Wentz is a retired U.S. Navy officer, as well as a retired high school and college instructor in the fields of history and literature. His novels are heavily based on his experiences in the military, including work in the Middle East, Central Asia, and Guantanamo. And it looks like one of his books right now, as it says, as of Memorial Day, this novel was #1 in Amazon in the category of military thrillers. That's the novel 0200 Hours. So congratulations on that, Eric. All right, why don't you let us know more about your work?
I'm going to start off right away. I'm just going to read the opening paragraph of the novel that just came out a few months ago. And I'm doing this because, one, it got great reviews, and secondly, it's indicative of something that I'm reminded of, in part because I listened to Bakul's presentation. She mentioned synchronicity. That term actually pops up in this novel, and it is emblematic of certain things that occur in my other novels. And Bakul, if you're originally from India, I'm sure you know that the word synchronicity comes from India, and Carl Jung took it from your people. and applied it. So I'm just going to read the opening paragraph. And by the way, this is not a misspelling. P-R-E-Y, praying in Iran. And I'm one of the few Americans who I think today can say, I've been to Iran twice. As a result of this novel, I can never go back. I don't want to be arrested. Okay? So the opening paragraph of Praying in Iran, it's entitled Icarus, and it begins with a quotation from the English poet William Hazlitt. Of all eloquence, a nickname is the most concise. Of all arguments, the most unanswerable. And the prologue begins in present-day Nagorno-Karabakh, which is part of Armenia and is being fought over right now between the Armenians and the people of Azerbaijan. And it abuts the Iranian border. So my book begins like this. Icarus, scandalous, in his old age, waxed his Harley, black and beautiful, naked on the knoll in the sun. Squinting and sweating, he slid his chamois nonchalantly over the brilliantly lit frame of hot metal. Blinded by memories that snuffed out the present, he rigorously rubbed off the dirt and specks of vegetation that clung to the fenders. Mortified by memories of his failures, he prepared to rescue the already dead from slaughter. He brushed the seat lightly with his chamois and checked to make certain that it was cinched down tightly. I'm not going to go any farther than that. I'll leave it with that. Now, a little bit about me. Yes, I'm a retired Navy officer. I also am a retired high school English teacher. And right now, I'm happy to say the one book that you alluded to earlier that is #1 right now, military thrillers. A Hollywood producer has contacted me, and we're working on what they call the film treatment together. And then recently, another agent called me about this book, wanting to know if I would be interested in working with her about something dealing with Netflix. So now, it didn't start out that way, but I come from a military family. I have 4 children. My oldest son is a major in the Army, and he did 2 tours in Iraq. So Adam, we have to talk, okay? My daughter did consecutive tours in South Korea, Afghanistan, and Iraq. My son met his wife in Iraq. They are both majors. My daughter met her husband in Afghanistan. He's a colonel, she's a major. And my father was career military. A number of my relatives are career military. So everybody wonders what happened to me. How did I end up teaching English literature and history? They said it just doesn't fit. Nonetheless, for me, it was. And I started out, I always knew I had a certain skill. And when I was in grade school, Radio Free Europe had a contest. In 25 words or less, what would you tell the people of behind the Iron Curtain about the United States? I wrote in. I was one of the 3 winners. So I got a few awards and so forth. And my material was broadcast on Radio Free Europe. I was only in the 8th grade. I was flattered. And then in high school, I really developed a greater taste for literature. And when I was in college, I did ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps. And I also took a number of poetry courses, which again didn't quite fit in with what most people assume about those who aspire to the military. But when I came out, Vietnam was winding down, and they didn't want, as they told me, we don't need any more officers. So I forgot about it for a while. In the meantime, I picked up some work dealing with certain government agencies. And at one point in the 1970s, they said, how would you like to go to Iran and take a job over there? And it was an instructor's position with a government agency. And I went over there, I spent 2 weeks, and I came back and I said, I think the country's getting ready to explode. And they told me, nonsense. A colleague of mine took the job. She went over there and got kidnapped and was eventually rescued by the Israelis. So I felt, first of all, vindicated. And then, of course, the government was toppled. off and on over the years, I went back into the Navy and Navy Reserves, and I was writing a lot even when I was in the military. I was an intelligence officer. And a lot of time I found that other officers, higher ranking than me, would come to me and say, would you mind writing this speech for me? I'd say, when it's due? They go, 1 hour. And they say, General so-and-so is coming. I go, how long did you have to write this, sir? And they'd say, well, I found out 2 weeks ago he was coming. I just didn't get around to it. So can you write it? So I found that I was writing for other people. And then at one point during the 1990s, when you had the war in the Balkans, I wrote a 500-page book for the US military, and they selected the number of copies. They said 500 copies only, and it will only be given to high-ranking officers that have to deal with the conflict in the Balkans. I thought at the very least my name would go on the book. That's not the way the military operates. They put the name of my command. I got no credit in public, but I did get some awards from the military for it. But I thought at a certain point, I'd like to write some things where I get the recognition. And so after 9/11, even though I was teaching, I kept getting called back to active duty. And at one point, what happened is I was in Central Asia. I never write about a country unless I've actually been there. So I was writing some things, and it was mostly true, but I knew that I had to get it past the government, the military, censors. And so I wrote my first book, and I said, okay, you can go forward with it. And they made me take a couple things out. I was overseas. I couldn't get an agent. I didn't know anybody. And so there was a guy in the military who told me, he said, did you ever read Clive Cussler? I said, all the time. He said, well, he's got a contest, adventure writers contest. Why don't you submit your book? Well, I did. And I was one of the winners. And I got invited out to Colorado, and I got all this, lots of attention. So that told me that the agent that I did eventually find, who didn't get the book published for me, really wasn't doing his job. And I concluded my book was better than he led me to believe. And so then after I spent a lot of time at Guantanamo, and I was one of the interrogators down there, I met a lot of people who absolutely hated me. They hated our country, but it was really an eye-opening experience as well. A lot of the people you read about in the newspapers, I got to spend time with them, sitting in the same room, just a couple feet away from one another. That experience eventually ended up in a novel called Killing Sharks. And the novel has won a number of awards. And what eventually happened is that I got an agent in Hollywood who read my book. He said, I'd like to represent you. And I thought we were going to go off on it because he was looking for someone to make it into a film and find an independent publisher, not a vanity press. What happened is I got a call from one of the major publishing houses in the United States, and you would know the name. And the guy talked to me, he said, I like your book. He says, here's the problem. He said, you write too well. He goes, military thrillers have to be succinct, no fluff. And I said, the people that critique my book are some of the highest ranking people in the military, and they love the way I write. I don't want to lose that audience. And he said, well, in that case, we're not interested. And so I said, okay, there's nothing I could do about it. So then in January of this year, after I published this book, again, without an agent, I published this book, I get a phone call from someone, and it's an agent. I didn't know the agent. Agent said, I read one of your books. And I asked, which one? And she said, the one you just published. And she goes, I really like it. She said, I therefore went back and read your other book, this one. She said, I can make it a bestseller. She said, your problem is publicity or the lack thereof. She said, if you'll listen to me and do what I ask you to do. She said, and I'm not kidding, this is what she said. She said, I'll make you number one in USA and Amazon. She said, but you have to listen to me. As she was saying that, I thought back to Tom Clancy. Some of you may know the story of Tom Clancy when he tried to publish The Hunt for Red October. He sent it to the Navy Institute Press. It's the only company, it's the only press he sent it to because they specialize in things that might be of interest to military personnel. The woman who eventually became his agent said she was walking down the hallway and found his manuscript in a trash can. Another agent had thrown it in there. She picked it up, started paging through it. She said, I knew immediately what the problem was. She said, I knew why this could be a bestseller. She called Clancy and said, if you'll listen to me, I will make you #1. I remembered that when this woman called me. Well, the woman deleted 25% of the novel. She said there's entirely too much technical stuff in here that only submariners can enjoy. Am I out of time?
I think we have to move on.
Okay.
But so many questions. I'm sure we have so many questions for you, and it's a fascinating journey. Thank you so very much for sharing it. And we'll hope to talk more about it at the end. Thank you again. Our final author is Tim Akers. Tim Akers grew up in rural North Carolina, the last in a long line of Scottish bankers, tourist trap barons, and theologians. He moved to Chicago for college and stayed to pursue his love for apocalyptic winters and infernal summers with tornadoes in between. He writes unapologetically epic fantasy. So Tim, thank you so much for finishing up our presentations tonight. Look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much for hosting this. Like I said in my email, coronavirus has kind of thrown our entire publication world into chaos. So events like this are very much appreciated. Like I said, I'm a traditional epic fantasy writer. I'm traditionally published. I started writing in college for various gaming companies, like Dungeons and Dragons, but not quite that brand. And after college, I got occupied with life, with having a house and a wife and so forth. And then one day I woke up and I was 30 years old, and I had sworn I was going to be famous by then and wasn't. So I started working on trying to get published in a traditional way. I started working on short stories. I made my first prose sale within the first year. Met my agents later the next year, but did not sign till 5 years after that. Sold my first book in 2008. I have 6 published novels. My 7th comes out in September. That is the one here to my right, your left. It's called Night Watch. The elevator pitch for Night Watch is Men in Black Goes to the Renaissance Fair. I wasn't going to do any reading from it, but I would like to talk a little bit about how it came about, because like I said, I have a New York agent. I had just finished up a 3-book contract for an epic fantasy series called The Hallowed War, which Wheaton Public Library has copies in stock, or you can go to any B&N in the country and pick it up. When the contract was finished, before the 3rd book actually came out, my agent and I began the pitching process for whatever came next. For me, that was, I produced what's called a pitch document. It was a 2-page, probably 8 different pitches, about a paragraph each of just ideas that I had. He circulated that around the office. He's a fairly large guy. His name's Joshua Belmas. He's the same agent as Brandon Sanderson or Peter Brett. If you're fantasy fans, you'll know who those guys are. They passed it around and narrowed it down to 3, and I picked one, and that was a book called Wraithbound, which I'm actually still in the revision process. But about 3/4 of the way through the first draft, I wake up pretty early in the morning, and instead of getting out of bed and being productive like intelligent people, I lie in bed and stare at the ceiling and think about my book. And one morning I was lying there in bed, and the idea for Night Watch just kind of came to me. That's usually not how it works. I have a pretty mechanical process of synopsis making and world building and outlining and stuff, but this is a book that just kind of fell in my head. And I sat down and wrote a first draft in 10 weeks, which my usual process is 6 to 8 months from, I kind of need to write a book to having a first draft that I'm happy with. There's a revision process that's built into that, a lot of outlining and going back and forth. But this was an unusually fast process for me. I sent it to my agent. I said, this is not the book that you were expecting, but it is the book that I've written. And he and I went back and forth a couple rounds on it. And it sold not immediately, but pretty quickly. I've had a fair amount of success with how quickly my stuff turns around. I was in the unusual position early in my career of being famous in the United Kingdom, but not in America. All of my short stories, or most of them, sold to UK publications, Interzone and EV and stuff. My first publisher was Solaris, which is based in Nottingham. The 3-book series that I just finished was with Titan, which they're based in London, but my editor is actually in New York. And so I was in the awkward position of whenever I had a book come out, my publicist would say, so when are you going to be in the United Kingdom next? And I said, I'm not. I've seen the checks that you sent me. You've seen those checks. You know that I'm not flying to England anytime soon. So I was a bit of an enigma in the US. I'm known fairly well among gaming circles and in Chicago. And I mean, it's difficult to be your own marketing department. That's something I've never really caught up on. Yeah, this is from Bain Books, which is based in Raleigh, North Carolina. They're my local heroes. If you know Bain, they sell really great adventure series stuff, fun stuff, and that's what I write. I write books because I love me some adventure, some fantasy. There is a lot of in fantasy now, books being published by people who don't love fantasy, people who want to remake what fantasy is, or who are really focused on running away from the things that made fantasy a joy to me as a child. I love knights and monsters and sword fights and heroes, I don't mind grimdark fiction and stuff. There's always a little bit of weird stuff in my books, but I like heroes. So that's what I write. And that's what this book is really about. It's about a guy who he went to his local Renaissance fair to do a little bit of padded foam sword fighting, which I used to do in college back before the Society of Creative Anachronism was a thing. And his opponent turns into a dragon. That's what the cover art is. The dragon appearing out of nowhere. And he finds that there's this whole group of people who fight hidden monsters in the real world. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I see Courtney said very cool book cover art. Can you tell me a little bit about that process? Do you feel like it realized your vision that you imagined in the book?
Yeah, fairly accurately. I don't have any control over that. I've been very fortunate with my covers. This is a Todd Lockwood cover. If you follow cover art stuff, you'll know who Todd is. And he's one of the few guys who actually reads the book before he actually does the cover art and stuff. We got the initial offer from Bain, and the process of negotiating contracts is always pretty involved. There's questions of rights and percentages and stuff, and that's why I have an agent. I don't want to deal with that nonsense. But we finished the negotiation process. We signed the contract. That took about 2.5 months. The day after we signed, they sent me the sample cover because they were really into it and had already proceeded with it to that point. So yeah, I'm very happy with it. I very rarely see anything until the cover is complete and done, but I've been very happy with my covers.
Thank you. So Tim, you got me thinking, just to say, Courtney's put this in the chat, now is our chance to have a great conversation with all of us and for you to ask your questions. Please ask them of individual authors or also for the collective group, and people who want to chime in can chime in as they will. I guess, Tim, you said something that gave me a question I wanted to ask to the entire group just to get us going. You said, I loved it when you said you kind of wake up in the morning and just lie there and think about your book. It almost sounds like that's part of your writing process. And I'm curious for the rest of you, and more from you as well, Tim, if you, especially lately, when you're putting out your work, you're either publishing books, self-publishing books, however you approach it, if you have a kind of regular discipline, or if you have techniques that you use to stay focused, stay on track, maintain continuity and momentum with your work. And if any of you could speak to that, I would love to hear.
I'll be real quick. I mean, it is my job. So my wife and I are both self-employed, so we don't have alarms in our house. But we get up when we get up, and I'm usually in my office here by 10 o'clock in the morning. I put 2 hours to 3 hours in the morning and 2 to 3 hours in the afternoon. It is a very discipline-oriented process. I do spend a lot of time outlining ahead of time, and I'm usually working on 2 projects at a time. But it's really a matter of just getting your butt in the chair and writing. I mean, there are a lot of folks, I teach workshops at conventions about this sort of stuff, about how to go about the process of outlining a book, and, you know, really kind of approaching it from a commercial point of view, because I need to write 2 books a year in order to be profitable. So yeah, I've got a very disciplined approach to things. As a writer, it's very easy to convince yourself that you need to do, you know, you have to have the room the right temperature, you have to be, you know, all sort of muse stuff. That's art, and I do both art and craft. There are craft things that you can do to really train yourself to just get at it. And when I have friends who are like, oh, you know, I'm having trouble, you know, producing this thing that I'm under contract for, I'm 3 months late, I'm George Martin, so I don't need to write books anymore, I can just sit on my duff. I'm not that guy, so I tend to be very like, get at it, son, do it.
Yeah, I can agree with that completely. I mean, for me, I treat it like it's a job. I mean, at one point with one book, you know, I think I wrote it all in the Starbucks in downtown Wheaton. But you put on pants, you know, you shave, you dress like you're going to work, and you can. For me, it kind of helps things flow. I can make my deadlines if I treat it like it's a job. You know, I wrote a second book. It was in the library, but still, you know, I didn't go in my sweats all the time. You know, I put on chinos and a sweater or whatnot, and tried to treat it like this was my office, and I'm here to do a job from this window of time that I have to actually write. I mean, I would write between. I had a young boy when I started writing books, and you know, you go while he's at school. That's when you write, and you gotta. You know, like Tim said, you got to set deadlines, and you got to hit those deadlines, especially once you're in the revision process, when you have an offer, and not only your agent is asking for pages, but your editors are asking for pages, and you're trying to meet someone else's production schedule. So you have to have a degree of discipline that you would in just about any other job.
Yeah, thank you. I remember there's a story about John Cheever like putting on a suit and taking the elevator down from his apartment to the
Yes.
place in the basement that he'd established as his office, and that's how he would knock out stories. Rebecca, I'm curious, as someone who self-publishes, do you have a real discipline practice, or how do you go about it?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I would say I've had the luxury of not having to work, and so just being a housewife most of my life, and I, have put various number of hours into my work, depending upon what else is going on in my life, and that's about it, I guess.
That's great. Thank you very much. You tuck it in when you can, it sounds like.
Right. I just became a grandmother for the very first time, so
yeah,
I'm enjoying that.
Yeah, yeah. And Bakul, how about you for poetry? And I'm not sure if you're teaching or researching, but I'm curious how different.
Sorry about that. Okay, I have to unmute or no? Okay, I'm unmuted. So after getting my PhD from in geophysics, which is basically mathematics, very complex mathematics, I looked for a job and I worked for Fermilab and Argon Lab, big science projects. I helped build some of the largest machines in the world. So that was very fascinating. And I also had 2 small children when I began. So when they kind of went to college, I started writing. I thought I need to have something when I retire, I need to do something. So I started writing poetry, and I also wrote poetry when I was very young, in teenage years. But it seems I keep publishing. I have few niche places where they always accept my poetry, some online, some print. So I write them and then I send them out and they publish them. So this both synchronicity and bathymetry, they are is collection of all previously published poems. So the way I write, I didn't have much time. So what I do is normally I keep, whenever I think of some topic, I keep running it through my head, and then when I get a chance, I come and write it down. I am not at all a diary writer, but I do capture some of the information, and then I flesh it out. I am quite disciplined, actually. I usually try to write something every month, in spite of my extremely busy life. My job was a highly demanding job, so I spent a lot of time with very demanding people, so Nobel laureates and people like that. So that was not very easy, and children also were very important to me. But I think you need to have discipline. I also write a lot of essays as well as short stories. I plan to gather them and put them out as a collection. So it is really important to have the discipline to start something and to finish it. So I always finish the poems, just like I had to finish my projects at work. So
Great.
I love driving at night by myself. I get a lot of ideas in those trips. That's all.
Yeah, thank you so much. And for you, Eric, do you have a kind of discipline that you follow? Do you outline?
Well, because of my experience in the military, as well as pursuing several advanced degrees, I always had to be disciplined. But at the same time, that also meant that I was oftentimes writing under duress. So I learned to write in bed. A lot of my best ideas come to me in the middle of the night. You wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you say, what is it? Am I having a heart attack, or is that a really good idea? And then I always keep something by my bedside, because otherwise, if you wait till 6 or 7 in the morning, the line, whatever it was, the idea vanishes. At least that's been my experience. It's like not writing down a dream in the middle of the night, even though you say, oh, boy, that was a great dream. When I get up in the morning, I'll write it down and I'll see what it means. Well, I find invariably I forget it. So a lot of my best writing actually occurs probably before I drift off to sleep, or if I wake up in the middle of the night. And again, that's because a lot of time I wasn't getting much sleep. And when I was in the military, there were occasions when I'd be on duty consecutive days. I went during the Iraq War. I mean, there was a period where we went over a month without a single day off. But that's because, well, you can't tell the enemy, listen, I need a day off, and you guys just stop shooting at us, something like that. So at a certain point, you have to say, you know what? You have to make your own time to do these things.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm seeing if there's any questions from our viewers, our audience.
Yep, I don't think we have any yet. If anyone has any, now is the time. Otherwise we can end as we are past 8 o'clock, but I don't see any questions. Anyone of our panel has any questions for each other?
Is everybody's book available online or on Amazon?
Yes.
Not mine.
Oh, that's right.
didn't get
Bakul, yours
around
was
to
hard.
it.
Yeah, Bakul's were hard to find, I remember. But I believe, do we have copies at the library? Because
Yes.
Okay, and in circulation?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And
Okay.
you can also go to Bakul's website, which is bakulbanerjee.com. Is that correct?
bakulbanerjee.blogspot.com, and at the bottom there is about me, and there you can, if you send me a check, I will mail you the book.
Okay.
I have to put these things on Amazon, I know.
Well,
Well,
Bucko, do you live in Wheaton?
Yes.
I'm coming to your house. I'm getting a book.
Okay. Thank you. Thank
now-
you. The address is there, and give me a call. What is your email address?
oh, after this, you know what? We're actually going to send everyone's
okay.
information
That's-
after this,
so-
and we can connect you with Eric if you
Yeah.
That will be nice. That will be very good.
Absolutely.
Just
So
real
those
quickly,
of you who are
the book that I've got here,
Oh, go ahead.
Night Watch, that is not out till September 2nd, but you can pre-order it now. It'll be everywhere at that point, but it is not yet out.
Great. Thank you. So we will be sending out a follow-up email as well to those of you who are in our audience, and in that will include the information about where you can purchase the author's books or access that. So watch for that in your inboxes.
We'll send it out just here in a few minutes. So,
And
okay.
Eric, I want your book too. So.
Yeah. This has been such an amazing evening in terms of variety of author content, and what I feel hearing a lot, I brought it up with Bakul, is that, so much now, I wonder, when you talked about sword fighting, Tim, it seems like people are drawing from their lives, from their experiences, and yet completely transforming it on the page. So it's a wonderful thing to hear about that. And again, very, very motivating to me as someone who likes to write. So
I've never killed a dragon. I've thought about it a lot, but I've
you've
never
got
actually
metaphorical dragons, I'm sure.
executed on the task. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
For-
you all.
Thank you.
You.
us.
Karen.
Yeah,
Thank you
looking forward
all.
to reading your work.
Yes, and we'll hope to see you all in 2 weeks for our last virtual local author fest.